Yeah, my career at Gavi began 8 years ago. I'm now heading up the private sector partnerships and innovations team at Gavi the Vaccine Alliance. And 8 years ago, I joined from coming from academia. I had just finished my master's in global health and development, and prior to that, I had worked in consulting and in the legal industry, and then worked across different countries such as Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And now, what I've been doing, and my career at Gavi has been focused on looking at the problems that a lot of low and middle income countries face in immunizing their children, and making sure that children who live in poverty or communities who don't have access to healthcare, particularly vaccination, how can we look at those challenges around making vaccines to the people, making sure people understand the vaccines, making sure that there's enough understanding of the system to be really effective. How can you look at those challenges, and how can we bring the expertise, the know-how, the innovation, the technology from the private sector to support those countries? So it's a very interesting area. It's an area that Gavi's been focused on for the last 20 years, and my job is really to look at different sources of support, and that source is really from the private sector. So corporations, foundations, philanthropies, high net worth individuals, to really help us on a range of activities. So it's a pretty exciting 8 years, and it feels like it just started yesterday. It's a great question. What does Gavi do? If you go back almost now 22 years, the situation in a lot of countries, particularly those who are not as wealthy or don't have as many resources as other countries, vaccination rates was in some countries for children stagnating, and at worst it was declining. And there are many reasons to that, but one of the principal reasons is that a lot of these countries simply could not afford to have access to vaccines which are known and proven to prevent diseases such as measles, such as Japanese encephalitis, such as diphtheria. And the real tragedy around that is that you had a lot of available vaccines for high income populations in high income countries, but for one reason or another, and we can get into that, there just wasn't available to low-income countries. And one of the reasons was the price of the vaccine. The price of the vaccine was just too high for a low-income country to afford. So Gavi stepped in and did, essentially a couple of things. It grouped together and it worked as an alliance, and it brought together alliance members, partners that are responsible for safe and efficient and effective vaccines, the WHO, partners that are responsible for helping countries deliver vaccines and making sure they have the right systems in place, UNICEF. It worked with, countries and the pharmaceutical industry who are sort of developing these vaccines, and, donors who financing as part of the overall foreign aid to low-income countries, as well as the countries receive that. And we put this group together, and one of the things that we found is that if we're able to pull together all of the demand across the countries and pull that demand together and pull some financing together, so instead of doing bit by bit on the demand side, and instead of countries giving foreign aid in different countries altogether, if you pull it together, what you have right now is effectively the largest procurer of vaccines for the world's birth cohort, which is what Gavi is essentially. It basically pulls together all that demand, all that financing, and goes to the vaccine industry and saying, hey, you may not be able to sell your vaccines to these countries because you may be giving it as a charity. We don't want to do charity. Let's do business. And let's do that in a sustainable way. But we will give you access to this broad market, and we will secure the financing if you can work on our terms. And our terms are that you got to help us, get a real good price we can negotiate on an affordable price, and we can make sure that we'll pay that, and we make sure that the countries also pay their fair share. So everybody pays something into that, and over time, our share of financing for vaccine purchase decreases, and that difference is made up by the countries themselves, because ultimately what we do as Gavi is do ourselves out of business so that we don't have to continue to negotiate on these levels in a current form, and so we can help countries make that transition so they actually don't rely on donor funds as much, but they start to purchase that. And we've got some great examples of how that happens. So if you look at it, if you just take a step back, we've been able to restructure how development aid and how countries engage with that and have access to high quality, safe, effective products, and we build markets for markets that were underserved previously. Now, if you fast forward, what does that mean now? That's great, but what does that mean in real tangible results? We've been able to, through our Vaccine Alliance, which is a group of these people that I've discussed before, immunize well over 900 million children. We've saved, well over 40 million lives. And we've been able to generate a significant amount of economic benefit for the world, close to $150 billion. And that what that means is that children now go to school, so they're more productive, parents don't take time off work, the cost of sickness doesn't become a hindrance to individual, community, and national level economic prosperity. So, and we've seen this with more than ever now, we've seen this with COVID, which is the link between vaccine equity, efficiency, and effectiveness is linked to a healthier society, a healthier economy, stronger communities, and a better world for everybody. So, a long answer, but I think it's complicated. It's a short question, which is, it fires up a lot of passion in everyone working at Gavi. Our model is one which is something which I think we can be proud of. I mean, I think we would joke internally before COVID and before that is that we were the global health, or if not the world's global, best kept secret. I mean, before COVID hit, we had been, stimulating new advances in vaccines for, preventable diseases. We had been helping the response on other global outbreaks such as Ebola. We had been doing that. But I think what's happened now with COVID and COVAX, which is a mechanism that essentially takes the Gavi model of pooling demand, but goes one step further because it now starts to invest in new vaccines, in new vaccine technology. And we hold about the mRNA vaccines and ones which require, ultra cold chain. COVAX essentially is that end-to-end mechanism that was created with Gavi as a partner that not only develops new vaccines, makes sure that they're safe and effective, but then uses our structure to get them out as fast as possible. And so I think one of the things that we do on two hats. One is for non-COVID vaccines. As I said, we're the largest purchaser of vaccines, and we purchase for 60% of the world's birth cohort. If you just think about that, that means that a lot of countries depend on us, a lot of partners rely on us, and that means that we are able to kind of bring that level of the value of vaccines to the public consciousness. And now with COVAX, arguably, the world mechanism for making sure that you've got equitable access of vaccines. I think we've delivered over 2 billion doses to over 144 countries. There's still a lot of work to be done. All of the work that we see happening in terms of making a precious commodity, such as a COVID-19 vaccine, available to the globe is what Gavi and COVAX have been doing. So, the last couple of years have really provided us some really critical learnings. and some real sort of wins and some challenges. But I think the ultimate outcome of that is, working within across partners with different stakeholders from the private sector, from academia to science, R&D labs. The power is when you bring it all together through a platform like is Gavi, you can achieve tremendous things. And I think that is recognized by world leaders, politicians, and actors and celebrities, and they recognize that. And we've been fortunate to have a lot of support globally for the work that we're doing, which is a privilege to have here as well. Yeah, I mean, look, before I get onto that, I just, we'll talk about this. I think Gamers Without Borders is a fantastic platform that I think can be replicated across multiple areas. And I think within esports and that environment, and with the video games industry, there's a lot that can be learned from how they worked in that. But let me just go back and say, there's two things here. There's obviously what we're talking about with COVID and COVID-19, and I would say that, we may have forgotten in some parts of the world about the pandemic, and we like to say this in Gavi: the pandemic has not forgotten about us globally. There are a lot of countries who do not have not had one single access to COVID-19 vaccines, and we're trying to resolve that situation. But if we take a step back, one of the things that we are looking at the moment is, if you think about Gavi's routine work, that is childhood immunization, of approximately 70 million children that we aim to reach through our routine activity, about 10 million of them don't get access to any single vaccine. And no, they don't have access to one single vaccine. Now, that's important because those children, what we're calling zero-dose children, i.e. they have not had one single dose, when you zoom out, those children account for more than half of all the world's vaccine-preventable deaths. So what you have is a situation is, globally, you may be doing really well on your vaccination status for children, but when you zoom in, there are certain areas and communities that these children don't have any access to vaccines, and that negative impact is outsized in terms of the overall figure when you look at the stats. So that's really important to us. I think that's really important to everybody because these children also live in communities that have potentially that don't have in communities where families would live on less than $1.90 a day, so there's a poverty problem. They probably have really challenges on education. There's an education problem. There's a real challenge around, family planning and gender issues and gender barriers. So there's a gender problem. And so we're focused now, and this is where your audience and Games Borders will be really enthused and motivated, hopefully, to help us reach those children. Because you start to reach them with vaccination, you start to reach them with other, that becomes an entryway to then reach them about education, poverty alleviation. You start to educate and support them on removing gender barriers. And so that is really critical. And so that is something that we're really focused on. And we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. Because once that figure starts to become more than 10 million and that figure increases, you'll start to see, unfortunately, and we're starting to see this now, a potential resurgence in some countries of measles, which is highly, highly infectious. Now, you don't want that to become an outbreak in a country or a group of countries. So which is why we're really focused. By 2025, we want to reduce the number of zero-dose children by 25%. By 2030, we want to reduce it by 50%. So it's an ambitious target. And for that goal, we'll need new partners, new financing, new investment, new sort of ways of working. And I think this is where I think the Gamers Without Borders, the support they provided to us in 2020, I think it was more than just over $1.3 million. That was able to procure over 440,000 doses of AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines. That translates into around 223,000 people immunized. And that is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's a really tangible impact that you can see from an investment, an initiative, a platform. And I think what we want to do now is take that and focus it and really be focused on the zero dose child. And I think that's really where we need to, and we're getting support from Games Without Borders, as I said, is I think it's a tip of an iceberg for a broader movement within the video games, a very lucrative industry, and there's a lot of connection points with the, with a growing demographic from across countries, and it's the number of video game users across Africa and Asia is increasing, along with the United States and Europe. I think there's a group there that we can really tap into, and ultimately they will become the advocates, because vaccine equity is something that we all know. Hopefully now we all have to get behind. It's very simple. The more funding we have, the more support we have, the more voices we have, the more advocates we have, the more vaccines we can buy, the more we can help people understand and dispel, rumors around vaccination. I think with that community, it's a really important issue. Having that financing, having that investment, having those donations is critical. Every bit counts, and I think we've seen this again. We go back to COVID and the work of COVAX. Really, every dollar counts, because that dollar translates into a dose or supports a couple of doses, right, of a vaccine, and we know that vaccine can prevent death. That simple. It really is that simple. Help us through the financing. Help us lend your voice to help people understand that vaccines, do create healthier, prosperous communities, help rebuild economies. And I think that's an important message, as well as financing that Games Without Borders can help us with. One of the things that we do is we just be really clear about, for every dollar you invest in a vaccine, you get about over $50. I think it's now $57 return on investment. So, a lot of the Gamers Without Borders, a lot of the people sort of, playing the games know about their investment in time and what that means for them in terms of how much effort they put into something. I think that's a metric they can understand. Like, this is a really good return on investment, and it's something that you can see. Vaccines save lives, and an investment in a vaccine is also builds communities and economies, and I think that's really important right now, more than ever. It's a good thing to do. It saves lives, and it makes the world a better place.